the first step is often to just wrap your head around the fact that, okay, I am now the CEO of my money. No one else has to be consulted when I make decisions. I don't have to ask anyone's permission when I'm deciding things about my financial future or my kids' financial future.
Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Katherine Miller. This is where we have honest, thoughtful conversations about divorce. The emotional, financial, legal, and family questions no one prepares you for. From deciding whether to separate, to navigating the process with dignity, to rebuilding what comes next, Divorce Dialogues is here to help you find clarity, perspective, and a better way forward. Money is one of the most overwhelming parts of divorce. But what makes it so difficult isn't just the numbers, it's the stories that we carry about money. What it means about us, what it says about our future, where we've come from, what we believe is fair or safe or possible. And in divorce, these stories can start to drift pretty far from the actual financial reality, from what the numbers really show, and what is actually sustainable and what will matter over time. And when that gap opens up between the story and the reality, that's when people start to feel the most stuck, the most reactive, and the most uncertain about what to do next. So what this conversation is really about is closing that gap, not just understanding the numbers, but understanding them in a way that allows you to make decisions that are grounded, intentional, and aligned with what actually matters to you. Money is one of the most overwhelming parts of divorce, but it's also where some of the most important decisions get made. And I'm joined today by Kimberly Palmer. She's a personal financial expert at NerdWallet and the author of Smart Mom, Rich Mom, a book that explores how women can build financial security while navigating the realities of family life. Kimberly brings a practical, judgment-free lens to the financial side of divorce, from the first steps to take when your finances change to how to rebuild stability and make smarter decisions for your future. This is a conversation about taking control, reducing fear, and creating a financial path forward that actually supports your life. Welcome, Kimberly. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Katherine. Thank you so much for having me.
In Smart Mom, Rich Mom, you talk about how women can build wealth while managing the realities of family life. How does divorce disrupt that financial plan in your view, and in ways that people might not necessarily see? And where do people start rebuilding?
Well, divorce can really turn pretty much everything about your money upside down, because suddenly you go from having two people combining all sorts of things, your assets, your income, your budget, your spending, and then suddenly it's split in two, and you have to grapple with how to rebuild your finances, how to even make day-to-day decisions to the bigger decisions like long-term planning. And I think that one of the big messages I hear from the women I interview who are going through this or have gone through this is that the first step is often to just wrap your head around the fact that, okay, I am now the CEO of my money. No one else has to be consulted when I make decisions. I don't have to ask anyone's permission when I'm deciding things about my financial future or my kids' financial future. And so it's really about, first of all, just wrapping our heads around that mindset shift and going from there. And then you can build your next financial game plan to how you're going to rebuild, how you're going to think about your finances from now on. Because sometimes it means that during the marriage, sometimes the man was managing a lot of the investments or the day-to-day money making decisions. And sometimes it is a real mindset shift to taking all that on and being the person who's solo in charge. And so it really starts from there and then gets into the nitty gritty.
It's kind of interesting. You said you don't have to ask anyone, but you also don't get to ask anyone, right? That can be super scary. And also it comes at a time, so you're unwinding your financial plan, right? Because you had a financial plan that involved two people together. And whether or not it's a two-earner family or a division of tasks between the couple and an identity, right? So you have an identity that's intertwined with the other person's identity as well. And I think that obviously divorce disrupts all that. Is there anything else you think about divorce that makes particularly women feel so much more overwhelmed around money?
I think it has to do with the long history of how women have been taught to think about money and talk about money and interact with money. I mean, it was so recently that we even could take out credit cards in our own names without a husband's income being seen first and approved by the credit card
And
companies.
let's just pause for a minute. So the listeners might not know that that was in the 70s.
It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild how recently that was.
That was my teenage years. So like that is insane to me. And I had no idea. Or a mortgage, by the way, if you were married, you couldn't take it out in your own name. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just think that is insanely recent.
I'm so glad you doubled down on that history because I think that it's pretty shocking when you think about how much has changed since the 1970s and like how, of course, we didn't watch our mothers and grandmothers do certain things with money because they weren't encouraged to and they weren't taught to. And so sometimes we are learning and it's not something we had. Some people did, but not all of us had role models in our lives growing up to see women really embracing that role as the money manager. So I think part of it is that history and we should talk about that historical context because it's still impacting us today.
Absolutely. And it's not, I think what you're saying, Kimberly, is it's not just explicitly, right, that we would see it, but implicitly in the way that we were raised and things people didn't say as much as the things that they did say. Is that right?
That is so true. And I think that part of what can help us is talking more openly about money, especially if you have the ability to do that with your own family members, with older family members, especially women who've gone through situations similar to yours before. Having those conversations can be such a helpful step because I think we've also been told for so long to not talk about money. It's something, that shouldn't be discussed and is something to whisper about and not talk openly about. So I think one thing I always advocate for is just having those conversations. And one of my favorite things to do is having them with older family members, especially if they've gone through struggles of their own, they've gone through low points, and they're willing to share that with you.
Yeah, I think that's so true because I think that there are so many ways in which we really don't realize this thing. I remember like when the whole Me Too thing happened, I thought to myself, yeah, that never happened to me. And then one day I had this overwhelming thing, like, or I just like burst into tears. And I'm like, wait, that was my whole life, like as a young person, right? Avoiding walking a particular way because there was a construction site and it would be lunchtime. Or, like all of these things that like just all these sort of like micro aggressions that were just a way of life. And I think around money, women particularly have a sense, and I think men do too. It's just the story is different, right? There's like little micro ways in which it controls us or we feel controlled by it or something like that. I know that one of the themes of your book is for people to start with small, like manageable steps and not be like, oh my God, how am I ever going to like manage my own portfolio or make financial plans for retirement or anything like that. So what are some of the first things that someone might do at the beginning of a divorce to start to get some sense of clarity and control?
I think the first step is looking at, okay, where are you today? Writing out a simple cash flow statement. What income do I now have coming in? What income or what spending is going out? What are my debts? What are my assets? Just writing that down and having a sense of organization, I think can help us get past that first step of feeling paralyzed or so overwhelmed we just can't even do anything. Creating, even if you're a paper kind of person, writing it out, or if you prefer digital methods, using either an app or even just empty Google Doc to put all this information down so you're not keeping it in your head. You don't have to remember everything. You just write it all down. I think having that insight can be a really good first step and help lead to the next steps of whatever action steps we need to take. But looking at a snapshot of our money today, I think is the number one step.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's kind of like a brain dump about it, right? And I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if someone is listening to this and thinking, all right, I'm going to do that, what's the right way to do it? That there is no real right way to do it, right? That you should just put it all down and you can sort it out later. That's what it sounds to me as I hear you talking, Kimberly.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm someone that's drawn to like a paper-based method. I want my colored pens and to like write it all out so it looks pretty. But some people, don't need all that. And maybe you want to use an app. There's so many apps out there that can help you do this as well. So you have a lot of options today, and it's about choosing the one that feels right to you. Hopefully, ultimately, it even feels a little bit enjoyable to update this document, to go back in and review it. So you want to choose whatever method just resonates with the way your brain works.
If somebody's listening and worried about making a financial mistake, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see people making during divorce? And I love this question because often the answer is very similar. So I'm curious to hear what it is that you have to say from your perspective.
Yeah, well, based on the many interviews I've done, I would say that the biggest mistake is just kind of like shutting down and not wanting to deal with it, like not wanting to deal with the money, not wanting to take even that first baby step. And it's being so overwhelmed, you don't even want to take a step. And sometimes that means, okay, maybe we can't do this on our own. Maybe we want to pull in someone else, like a certified financial planner or even a financial therapist, a professional to help us. Sometimes it can be a friend who's really good with money. And we just say, hey, can you talk me through this? Because I need a sounding board. And sometimes after divorce, it's about finding your new sounding board and having a new person you can go to when you're trying to work through a money decision. Because sometimes, to your earlier point at the beginning, it's not easy to do all this on our own. We need a support network. So it's about rebuilding that network.
Divorce Dialogues is brought to you by Miller Law Group. We believe divorce isn't just a legal process, it's a human transition. At Miller Law Group, we help people navigate divorce with dignity, clarity, and respect, focusing on conversations that lead to better outcomes for families. Learn more at miller-law.com. Let me know what you think about this, but I think that avoiding often means people holding on to things, right? I'm avoiding really taking on and making a new financial plan. So I'm just going to hold on to the house. I'm going to hold on to this job. I'm going to hold on to this not job. And that's just a way, in some ways, of dealing or not dealing with the stress of making a new plan and what that means about all the cascade of that, right? What it means for us as who we are, where we live, how we spend our time, our money, how we are with our children, all of that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the house thing because I think that is also one of the biggest mistakes that women make going through divorce is to want to hang on to things like the house, which might not be the best financial decision, but it is a very emotional decision to decide what to do about that. And I think that sometimes having a third party or like someone who you trust to talk through about these choices can help take some of the emotion out of it and help make a financial decision. Like, does it really make sense to, give up other things financially to stay in the house? Can I afford it? Talking through all of that, like those things are not easy. So we need someone we can trust to really work through it.
I mean, a lot of things about money are emotional, right? I mean, money is such an emotional thing because it's so much more in our society than a way to pay the bills, right? We measure success, power, and compare ourselves to other people based on money or our perceived story about money for ourselves and for them. The idea that we're going to have to make a new plan, create a new story, a new narrative for ourselves that isn't one about loss, even if it means that we're going to not have as much money to spend on things like vacations or fancy cars or whatever it is that we've come up to be able to do and to make that okay. And so there's a sort of short-term, long-term thing. I know you talk about this in the book as well. So help us understand a little bit about kind of the balance between long-term thinking and the short-term financial stress of going through the divorce and not actually being yet in that long-term place, if that makes sense.
Totally. I almost think it takes totally different parts of our brain to address the day-to-day short-term money decisions and then the long-term planning. And sometimes what I've learned is that we aren't ready to deal with the long-term planning yet while we're going through an immediate crisis or we're very stressed out. And so sometimes you can just say, okay, I'm going to set aside these long-term plans. I'm not going to think about that right now because I need to just focus on, what are my immediate needs? What do I need to worry about paying for this week or this month? And it's okay to, when you're going through something difficult to, put that off. But then once you do have a softer landing place and the stress levels have come down a little bit, it can be helpful to say, okay, now I'm going to dedicate an hour of my weekend to thinking about my long-term plans because, of course, divorce often completely changes those long-term goals, the long-term plans, and you want to make sure you're putting effort and time into thinking through what you want now in the long term. Sometimes it just takes a little more time to feel ready to adjust that.
Yeah, I actually think that I'm often find it useful when I'm working with our clients to say, where do you want to be 5 years from now, right? Like it's so far out there that we don't even have to start worrying about how you're going to get there because it's 5 years from now. Make it 2 years, 1 year, because I think it's hard to make a short-term plan that might or might not work if you really don't know kind of if you're going east or west, right? Do I turn left or right? I mean, I don't know. I get out of the driveway. So I think if you say, okay, this is where I'd like to be in 5 years or 2 years, 2 years is maybe a more useful thought process. And then think, okay, that's a plan for 2 years. That's a lot less stressful because I don't have to make any changes today for that 2 year plan. And then once we have that kind of build out, now it makes the interim planning, it's just interim planning. And it makes it a little less stressful. And you know, at least, well, I turned left out of the driveway because I want to go to New Jersey, or something like that. What do you think about that approach as well?
I completely agree with you. And I think sometimes it takes just breaking it down, going back to the theme of like small steps to get to the bigger steps. Sometimes you just want to say, okay, like this is what I need to do this week. This is what I need to do this month, and just go from there. And then you have your year-long plan. Then you can think about next year. I'm such a planner, so I like breaking it down into those minute steps. But one thing leads to the next, and you can like zoom out as you feel ready.
Yeah, because if the plan involves, say, going back to work, well, that can be like, oh my God, who's going to want to hire me? I've been out of the workforce 10, 15 years. I'm in my 40s, 50s, 60s. Like, okay, great. Let's just stop worrying about who's going to want to hire you and think about if that wasn't a problem, what would you want to do? 5 years from now, what are you doing? And how are you spending your time? Well, I'm working. Great. What are you doing? How are we going to get you from here to there? It's it just makes it like a step along the way instead of this humongous paradigm shift.
I totally agree. And sometimes that next step, it might be, oh, I want to go earn my certificate in this, get a new credential. And then once you have that idea, it's easier to say, okay, now I just need to go sign up for that, order the workbook, get working on it. And just having that next step in mind, it helps you build that momentum.
So for someone who has been in a family where there's been a division of labor so that one person has more responsibility for making the financial decisions and managing the money, how could somebody who wasn't that person kind of get up to speed pretty quickly during the divorce process or shortly after so that they have like more confidence about it?
I think this is one of the most common things for women to go through, and something that I feel like I talk about all the time. And there's no easy, simple solution, but it's really about leaning into that new role and embracing it and putting time into it. And I think it can start with just, first of all, making sure you have your new support network so you don't feel like you're doing this all alone. You have people you can go to and talk through, especially big financial decisions that you want to weigh the pros and cons. It really helps to have someone you trust. So either a good friend who loves talking about money or a professional. Nothing wrong with using a professional. And then from there, it's about setting the time aside so you are investing in that, your own money education, you're embracing that role. And sometimes that means, okay, every Saturday I'm going to set aside an hour, and you can try to make it fun if possible. It might get more fun over time, but setting aside that time to have a snack, put some music on, go through whatever financial tasks you need to do. And we don't want to be too overwhelmed. So I like picking 3 financial tasks, no more than that at any one time, and just going from there, because it's about taking those small steps and eventually you'll feel like you are making good progress.
So one of the things that you write about that I really love is about aligning your money decisions with your values. I wrote a book called The Emotionally Savvy Divorce, and it's really about how your emotions can help you figure out what it is that's most important to you. And because the way how you feel about stuff can sort of be a pathway to what those core values are. Talk a little bit about how after divorce, someone can redefine their financial identity without feeling like they failed, because I think that there's a big concern that we all have about somehow failing, especially when it comes to money.
I think sometimes our spending and where we're putting our resources is very out of whack with our values and with where we want those resources to be going. So I think it starts with just some reflection and thinking about, okay, what is actually really important to me? And do I want to maybe be spending more effort and energy and money on travel over the next few years? Maybe you weren't able to do that previously, and now you're realizing, oh, that is a core value of mine, and I want to invest in it. So I think first it starts with that self-reflection. And again, like I think it helps to talk out loud sometimes with a friend just to brainstorm, but deciding that first. And then from there, you can think about, okay, is my spending and resource allocation currently aligned with that? Or do I need to make some adjustments? I mean, you are in control now, so you can make some of those shifts without asking anyone's permission or, getting anyone else on board with you and going from there. So number one is definitely just deciding those directions you want to take.
Yeah, you've talked a bunch of times during this podcast about talking with a friend. And I think that some people really have a lot of shame around money. Like I know that when we have to do a budget report. I hate that word because it sounds like diet, right? But like we need to measure how people are spending their money because knowledge is power. And if we know how you're spending your money now, then it gives each person the opportunity to make a plan as to how to allocate those resources in the way that is most important to them. And oftentimes people will come back and apologize to me for how much money they spend on clothes or on beauty or on travel. And I am agnostic about how you spend your money, right? But obviously they feel like they're apologizing to themselves in some way, right? I just want to be cautious that if someone is listening, they are feeling ashamed about how they spend money or what they don't understand about money, find someone who's a really trusted person or a professional, because I understand, like, professionals totally understand this dynamic around it. This is why they exist, right? Is to help people do stuff they don't know how to do. So I just wonder what you think about that.
I mean, it's such a good point. Financial shame and embarrassment is a recurring theme in so many conversations I have with women. We feel guilty about how we've spent money, about a mistake we made years ago. And I think that we have to forgive ourselves and just give ourselves some grace. No one's perfect, and it's okay to make mistakes along the way. And there's no reason to feel guilty about spending money on something that makes you feel good, whether that's beauty products or anything else. And so I think we have to accept that.
And even if you might have allocated your resources in a different way in the past and wish you had, this is where you are now, and it's your opportunity to make a change so that you can build a successful future rather than just repeating that same pattern. I'm sure you agree with that.
I completely agree. I like how you put that.
And so budgeting. So I said a few minutes ago that I hate the word budget because it sounds like restriction, right? Like it sounds like if I'm budgeting, then I'm not going to be able to spend as much money on eating out or on clothes or on beauty or on travel or something like that. But it's really just a financial plan. So you're the financial expert. I'm just the lawyer. How does budgeting help people rethink their spending and play a role in creating that financial future that people wish for?
Well, first of all, there are so many different ways to budget. And I think that it's about finding the method that works for you. And it might not be a budgeting method that's like counting every single penny. It could be something that's more, I like to think of it as ballpark budgeting, where you just have a general sense. I want one great breakdown that I often refer to is the 50-30-20 rule, where you have 50% of your take-home pay going to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to debt payments and savings. And I think something kind of big picture like that can help and work with people who are kind of resistant to the more minute details of budgeting. And, that doesn't work for everybody. Some people do want to count every dollar and penny, and there's nothing wrong with that. But other people are drawn to a more general method. And you just have to pick the one that works for you and then stick with it. Because applying a budget can make sure that your spending is in line with the values that we talked about earlier. And if we don't have any sense of where our money is going or where we want it to be going, it's easy to get out of whack for it to be misaligned. And so whatever you call it, whether it's budgeting or something else, I think we need some method of applying that alignment.
When you have seen women successfully rebuild after divorce, and I've seen this so many times, that someone who really didn't understand the money and then was able to successfully create a really stable financial future for herself. What do you think are the habits or mindset shifts that makes the biggest difference for someone like that?
I think the biggest mindset shift is embracing the new role as being solely in charge of your money. You get to make all of these decisions. And the women I've seen thrive the most are the ones that incorporate some significant aspect of joy into their new money plan. So I'm thinking of an example of a woman who said, I always wanted to learn how to kayak. And like that was a hobby that I wanted to embrace, but I never had the chance before. And so she built that into her budget and she has a kayak now. So just like finding a way to make it something fun and enjoyable and something that, brings you joy, I think that can just help give you the motivation that you're on the right path.
I'm going to ask you one more question, Kimberly, and that is, what do you think is the most surprising thing or a surprising thing that you've learned about women and money in the process of the work that you do and writing the book?
The most surprising thing is how much we all are thinking about money, even if we're not talking about it. And the second you ask someone, the second you open up yourself and say like, gosh, I've been really struggling with this awkward thing. Like, have you dealt with this? You'll have like an hour-long conversation with a girlfriend where you had no idea they were also going through some similar money issue. So I think it's like how much is going on under the surface with money that we don't talk about. And that's why I love talking about it.
And it's also surprising that we don't talk about it,
Yes.
right?
Yes. So I'm glad we are.
Me too. Kimberly Palmer, thank you so much for being my guest on Divorce Dialogues.
Thanks for having me.
If this conversation was helpful, share it with someone who might need it. And if you're navigating divorce yourself, you'll find more resources and episodes at miller-law.com. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.